What's going on out there in the land of the unfree America? Welcome everybody to the introduction for Constitution Headquarters. Get ready here. I'm going to teach you guys what jurisprudence is today. You're going to learn a little bit about understanding of jurisprudence. So let me give you guys a little bit of a larger view here. Over the past, I guess 6-7 months now, I have created a studio here that teaches you guys the entire history of our country. And there's a couple things on here that you're gonna have to see and understand before I can get in. And today we're talking about the 1971 case of Cohen versus California, because this is live. Everybody do me a favor, double tap on your screen right now. There's 50 people, double tap and we'll get 100 people, we'll get 200 people, we'll probably get 500 or 1,000 people pretty soon, because what I'm gonna teach you here using the graphic that I've created over the past 6 months is quite extensive. It's quite extensive. So now I'm gonna walk you guys down this. I'm gonna wait just a minute or two here, but I'm gonna walk you all the way down this board and I'm gonna show you what everything is on this board before we begin so that you guys understand exactly what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. Because first and foremost, I'm gonna teach you something today that you didn't know yesterday. And can one of the moderators please find my channel called Constitution Headquarters and put the link in there, because I'm gonna be moving people over to Constitution Headquarters. So let's get into the understanding here of what exactly is on this board. So we start at the beginning with the 7 articles of the Constitution. So if you guys are unfamiliar with the 7 articles of the Constitution, I'm gonna teach those in great detail. I have those on like flashcards. I have those in a game format called Constitution HQ that you can get on my website, Delete Laws. The game is not available yet. People have pre-ordered, several dozen people have pre-ordered, but the game is not ready yet. And the game is gonna raise to $99.99 pretty soon here. I have a meeting on Thursday to get the money for the purchase order, but let's go into detail here. Okay, so in the beginning, our Constitution is based and determined by 3 different Enlightenment thinkers, none more than John Locke and Charles de Montesquieu and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. These 3 men right here, their ideas and their processes of understanding government and what government is supposed to do, the founding fathers, James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Randolph, you can just keep going down the list. There's so many people, John Adams, who were the beginning of the founding fathers. They really took their ideas from these 3 men right here. That's what they did. The way that our 7 articles of the Constitution are set up, they're based on John Locke's book, 2 Treatises of Government. And I believe that's going to be published in 1690. Remember, our Declaration of Independence in 1774, our Constitution is ratified and set into motion 1789, 1791. So that's the very beginning of our country right there. Now, on this board right here, you're going to be able to truly understand jurisprudence. Now, this is super important that we learn what jurisprudence is. You guys do me a favor, double tap on your screen, double tap on your screen, double tap. Everybody take your finger and double tap. Put in the comment section, Team DLZ, because we don't stop. Okay, so now you have the 7 articles of the Constitution that are really created by these Enlightenment thinkers in the Enlightenment era. Now, in the very beginning, you have the First Amendment of the United States. Now, right now, it's covered up by George Washington. A few more things to happen to this board, but George Washington is the very first person who becomes president of the United States because he led the Revolutionary War, and that's the reason why George Washington was probably the most important founding father, because not only was he a military badass, but he was a mental badass, and the way that he was able to lead his troops was so phenomenal. It was I'm going to go into that later, but right now we're talking about the First Amendment and your right to free speech. And so here's what I want to ask you now, and I want you to answer this question. I want you to type it in the comment section, because I'm going to teach you something you didn't know yesterday. Do you feel like at the Supreme Court level you're more of a conservative or you're more of a liberal Supreme Court justice kind of person? Put it in the comment section right now. I want to know, are you more of a liberal Supreme Court justice kind of person, or are you more of a conservative Supreme Court justice kind of person? I want to read some comments here. I want to see you guys say it. because I want to know what you guys are. What you guys are. Are you a conservative Supreme Court justice guy, or are you a liberal Supreme Court justice guy or gal? I just want to know. So John Lund says neither. Okay, so now the First Amendment, you guys know what the First Amendment is. It's right here under George Washington. It says First Amendment. You see that right there. Amendment number 1 right there. What is the First Amendment? Let's break down the First Amendment. The First Amendment is RAPPS. Religion, assembly, petition, press, speech. So put that in the comment section, RAPPS. Religion, assembly, petition, press, speech. So those are the first 5 freedoms of the First Amendment, and they're ratified into the Constitution in 1791. That's why those 2 tacks are right there, 1791. So now you have this thing called free speech until the 1798 Alien and Sedition Act. And this is passed by John Adams. John Adams is president from 1797 until 1801, before Thomas Jefferson is going to take the realm and he's going to be president. Now, what John Adams does when he passes the Alien and Sedition Act, what this does is this greatly limits free speech. You don't have free speech with the Alien and Sedition Act. I'm sorry this is backwards. On the pre-recorded version, I'll make sure. You guys double tap on the screen. 250 people in here. Double tap on that screen for me. I'm going to teach you something you didn't know yesterday, and I want to see the answer to the question. Are you a conservative Supreme Court justice kind of person, or are you a liberal Supreme Court justice kind of person? Put it in the chat. Okay, now that we understand that. So your first impediment into the free speech is the Alien and Sedition Act, passed by John Adams, president from 1797 to 1801. Okay, so now we know that. So now the jurisprudence of the First Amendment, as we follow down this line right here, and you see all these different presidents and all these different cases, you keep coming down right here, you're following the line, and we're gonna end up, as we go down the line, you can see the years of history swinging by right here. You can see those years of history. And as you come all the way down, we're still cool. Boom, right here. Chaplinsky versus New Hampshire, 1942. Now, I'm sorry that that's backwards for y'all. I apologize. But there's nothing I can do about it on YouTube Live. There's no way to flip the camera to mirror the camera on YouTube Live. Now, Chaplinsky versus New Hampshire, 1942, is part of the jurisprudence of Cohen versus California in 1971. And what specifically is jurisprudence? Jurisprudence is our system of governance our system of legal theory is based on something called stare decisis. Stare decisis. And stare decisis, jurisprudence, kind of interchangeable, but they're a little bit different. And what stare decisis says is that you have to have a case previously decided to create case precedents. I used to know what it was. Stare decision, decisis stands for decision. And so in Chaplinsky versus New Hampshire right here in 1942, what the Supreme Court rules in 1942 is that there are limits to free speech. And those limits to free speech in Chaplinsky versus New Hampshire are going to be based on whether or not you are inciting a fighting words. Literally it's called fighting words. And those words specifically in Chaplinsky versus New Hampshire are, you're a damned fascist. If you call somebody a damned fascist, then you are inciting fighting words. Now, today, the definition of Chaplinsky versus New Hampshire and fighting words is going to be more based upon if you are saying things to people that would lead them to violence. And a good example of that would be if you go into a crowd of black people and you say, hey, you bunch of N'ers, then Chaplinsky versus New Hampshire is going to kick in, and the court that you go to, the trial judge, the Supreme Court, the appellate judge, the district court judge, the circuit judges, they're going to say, if you walk into a group of black people in 2025 and say, hey, you're all a bunch of dumb N'ers, they're going to say that you incited fighting words. Or if you were to say the words, hey, I'm going to kick your fucking ass, that would be Chaplinsky. You can't say words that would lead other people to believe or lead them into violence. Now, this case, Chaplinsky, is an extension of the Alien and Sedition Act in a kind of strange way. It's not jurisprudence because the federal act of the Alien and Sedition Act passed in 1798 by John Adams, that was legislated by the Congress and the House, written into law and signed by John Adams. We're going to go more into that. We're going to get into specifically how the three branches of government work. And so, I saw a video the other day, and someone said on a video, they said that the three branches of government, which is going to be Article 1, is going to be the congressional branch of government. Article 2 is going to be the executive branch of government. Article 3 is going to be the judicial branch of government. So that's how it breaks down, really simple. And then Article 4 goes into the states and to your privileges, and immunities and things like that, into your full faith and credit is going to begin Article 4. We're going to get in Article 4 later, but for right now, I want you to understand something that's really clutch. At the very beginning of the United States Constitution, when you get into the Constitutional Convention, right before the actual Constitution that was signed into law, ratified 1789, you're going to have this idea that the Founding Fathers wanted the congressional branch of government to be the strongest branch of government. The only people who can write and make laws are congressmen. That's House of Representatives and senators. So the Founding Fathers, they envisioned that the congressional branch of government would be by far the strongest and most powerful branch of government. Now, is that true today? No. The strongest branch of government today is actually the judicial branch of government or the executive branch of government, and we've seen that through multiple executive orders that were passed by Trump. Okay, so now we have a little bit of understanding. How is the Alien and Sedition Act of 1798 passed? It's written by a member of the House, went through the House committee down here, and then it went to the House, and then it went to the Senate, and then it went to the executive. And then when people sued and they said, hey, we don't think the Alien and Sedition Act is constitutional because it infringes on free speech, then it would go over to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court would determine the constitutionality of the Alien and Sedition Act, which has happened, but it has not been struck down entirely. We're going to get into that later. Okay, so we go back to here. First Amendment, right to free speech, 1791, ratified into the Constitution. We all agree on that, right? So far that you have free speech, right? Okay, cool. So now we go all the way down the timeline. We go all the way down here. Multiple presidents happen. We're going down the timeline here. This is the lynching graph up here where all these people were lynched and murdered. This is your Fifth Amendment right to remain silent, your due process clause. And then when you get down here to the 1942 case of Chaplinsky versus New Hampshire, this is the first huge, gigantic impediment where the Supreme Court says, put that in the comment section, the Supreme Court says, we've all heard that from people. The Supreme Court says, right? Who's the Supreme Court? An unelected body of black-robed tyrants that originally were politicians. They were all politicians. I'm going to break down each and every Supreme Court justice, but today for jurisprudence, we're just going to go over the case law and how these case laws compound on top of each other for stare decisis to be able to get to an understanding of what our freedoms are represented by the unelected Supreme Court. You guys do me a favor, double tap on your screen real quick. Everybody right here, subscribe to this channel. I'm going to teach you guys the history of America in great detail over the next several months. Double tap on your screen with your finger. There's 500 people in here. We got 94 likes. Double tap on your screen. Everybody double tap on your screen. I'll wait. I will wait a moment. I will wait. This is live. I'm teaching you live. This is all off the top of my head. This is just stuff I know in my brain. And I know it's factual. I know what I'm teaching you is 100% the truth, because people are going to scrutinize this and whatever, but I don't care. I'm going to teach you guys what jurisprudence is. Okay, so in 1942 is a major impediment to the free speech where they say, hey, you can't use specific words that are going to incite a fight into other people. Because if you incite a fight into other people, then you're going to cause a riot or you're going to... Okay, so now the next thing happens after these fighting words are established in 1942. You're going to go to the we're going to follow the red string here. Let me lower this bad chicken down. We're going to follow the red string here, and we're going to go into Terminio versus Chicago in 1949. Terminio versus Chicago is going to essentially, what it's going to do is it's going to use the jurisprudence of Czaplinski versus New Hampshire. And in Illinois, they had passed an ordinance that said it was illegal for you to give a speech that would incite other persons. So Terminio, just so you know, he was a priest, he was a preacher. And what Terminio did is he gave a speech in Chicago that incensed the crowd. He was a right-wing authoritarian, and he gave a speech that made everybody really, really mad. Now, so what Terminio does is he gets convicted of violating the Illinois statute that says that you cannot give a speech that's going to make people mad and bring them to anger and possibly to violence. So Terminio, when he's convicted of that crime in Illinois, and I believe this happens in 1945, just after World War II, Terminio, when he gets convicted of the crime, what he does is he then appeals to the Illinois Appellate Court. Now, wouldn't you know it, and you guys know this because I'm suing 2 judges, a cop, a prosecutor, and 3 bailiffs right now, Terminio loses at the appellate court level. So what does Terminio do? He then appeals to the Illinois Supreme Court and says, hey, wait a minute, I have a right to free speech. I have a right to free speech. And the Illinois Supreme Court says, no. The congressional branch passed a law that said you couldn't give a speech that would incite people to violence or incite them to make them angry and uncomfortable. So they uphold Terminio's conviction. Then Terminio, what he does is he files for certiorari with the United States Supreme Court. And in a very close decision, the Supreme Court determines that Terminio has a right to free speech to give any speeches he wants, as long as he doesn't use specific fighting words that were determined in Czaplinski versus New Hampshire. Okay, so then what happens next? Then we end up here. We end up going to Fiener, I'm not sure if it's called Fiener or Finer versus New York. And what this does is this upholds the conviction of a speaker whose provocative speech incited a crowd, emphasizing that authorities could intervene to prevent a riot or disorder. So essentially, these cases get turned upside down. Terminio is allowed to speak, Finer is not, Finer is convicted. So then after this, now each one of these cases is building up to Cohen versus California. So then let me rise up here. Let me rise up. Got to come all the way up here. All the way up. Okay. Then, after Finer versus New York here in 1951, we then end up going up to the 1963 case of Edwards versus South Carolina. I'm sorry that it's a little bit, the words are backwards. But the point is that in Edwards versus North Carolina, this protected the right to peacefully protest, ruling that states could not. In South Carolina versus Edwards, what it ruled in South Carolina, they had criminalized protesting. Now, if you remember, this is the reason I started with the first 5 big freedoms of the First Amendment: religion, assembly, petition, press, speech, RAPPS. Put it in the comment section, RAPPS. You got that? Double tap on the screen, everybody. Double tap. I'm going to teach you guys some shit today you didn't know yesterday. I promise you. When you leave here, you're going to be like, you know what? I did learn something today. So now, what happens in South Carolina versus Edwards is the Supreme Court upholds the right for Edwards to be able to protest, which essentially what it does is it turns the idea of Czaplinski and Terminio and Finer flat on its head, because the First Amendment has 5 freedoms, but they are absolute. So they all kind of combine together. Now, can you block some parts of a Supreme Court case and some parts get overruled? Absolutely. But in this particular instance, what South Carolina versus Edwards did, 1963, is it made it so that you had a right to protest. And your right to protest is expressed by how? Your right to protest is with your speech. So now these cases so far, Czaplinski versus New Hampshire, Terminio versus Chicago, Feener versus New York, South Carolina versus Edwards. Those cases right there, those are the cases that are the jurisprudence for Cohen versus California, which says that free speech can't be banned, but we're not done yet. We're not done. Because then when you go from South Carolina versus Edwards, you're gonna go down here, coming down, coming down, coming down, coming down. You're gonna come down to the 1964 case of Garrison versus Louisiana. And in Garrison versus Louisiana, what this particular case right here did, can you guys see that? Okay. Garrison versus Louisiana, it emphasized that false statements about public officials are protected unless they're made with actual malice, reinforcing robust protections of free speech. So Garrison versus Louisiana is going to work in our favor for free speech. Because after Garrison versus Louisiana, we're going to go even further to Tinker versus Des Moines in Idaho. And in Tinker versus Des Moines in Idaho, what it's going to say is that this affirmed that students have the right to speech rights in school so long as it doesn't disrupt educational activities. And this is going to be Tinker versus Des Moines. So far, we're getting to the point where free speech has to be upheld. And the way that free speech is upheld is through jurisprudence. The jurisprudence of Tinker, of Garrison, of South Carolina versus Edwards, of Terminillo versus Chicago, of Czaplinski versus New Hampshire. Without these particular cases, then Cohen versus California could not be, because Supreme Courts have to go by stare decisis, the jurisprudence of a case previously, to be able to lock in and say, hey, wait a minute, this case is based on something else, something bigger. On previously Supreme Court justices who voted in this court and they ruled in this court, they held the constitutionality of the law that was created by Congress and signed by the president. The Supreme Court held, it's not a ruling at the Supreme Court level, it held. And that holding, what that means is that when you get that holding at the Supreme Court level, what that means specifically is that the United States Constitution is ever so slightly altered. The First Amendment is ever so slightly altered by Czaplinski versus New Hampshire that creates the fighting words doctrine. You see that? So Czaplinski versus New Hampshire slightly altered the First Amendment. Now, there's a correction in that in Terminillo. Terminillo says that, hey, yeah, you're right. You can't use fighting words that are going to bring people to violence. You can't say, hey, I'm going to kick your ass, and then that's going to lead someone to believe that you're going to kick their ass. And so what do? You put up your fist and you pop the guy in the face because you're afraid he's going to punch you first. And so this creates the fighting words doctrine. Well, in Terminillo, this priest was given speeches and the people didn't like it, so it led them to violence. But the Supreme Court then says, no, wait a minute. We have the fighting words doctrine, but we're not going to say that you just can't use words that people don't like. You can't decide that words are going to be banned because you're saying things that people don't like. And so that's what Terminillo does. And then again, that's going to be upheld in South Carolina versus Edwards, and then it's going to be upheld again in Garrison versus Louisiana. And then we get to the 1971 case of Cohen versus California. Now, what happens in the case of Cohen versus California? You see how I'm wearing a shirt that says Constitution Headquarters on it? Well, in Cohen versus California, Cohen goes into a courtroom, I believe it's 1969, and he wears a shirt underneath of his jacket that says, fuck the draft. That's what the shirt says. I'm not going to censor myself because we're talking about history here, and we have to be very specific as we talk about history. So now what happens in Cohen versus California is a miracle because, as you know, I'm suing 2 judges, a cop, a bailiff, 3 bailiffs, and a prosecutor. And in Cohen versus California, when it goes to the Supreme Court, the Supreme Court says that the judge absolute immunity in the court because the bailiffs arrest Cohen as soon as there's a break or there's a recess, as soon as the trial recesses, and then it goes all the way up through the Supreme Court, and they rule in Cohen versus California that you have a right to free speech and that your free speech doesn't end at the courthouse doors. Okay, so now I asked you the question. I asked you the question in the beginning of this video right here. Are you more of a conservative Supreme Court justice kind of person, or are you a liberal Supreme Court justice kind of person? And on this graph, we have all of the presidents. We have every Supreme Court justice. I'll go over each one of them as we go on through the educational forum here over the next few months. So tell me now, I want you to write in the comment section, are you a conservative Supreme Court justice kind of guy, or are you a liberal Supreme Court justice kind of guy? Put it in the chat, and I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna wait till 500, 700 people here. Tell me, are you a conservative Supreme Court guy, or are you a liberal Supreme Court guy? Which kind of person, and I should say person because there's, about 40% of the room is women. So which do you identify with? Conservative or liberal? And so right here, I'm gonna read some stuff off here. The Texas rapper said he's more of a conservative Supreme Court justice kind of person. Cool, God bless you. KW said that they're more of a conservative. Conservative. One said anarchist, I see that. And you guys, there's 700 people here. Double tap on your screen for me and hit the subscribe button. We're on our way to 1 million subscribers on this channel, so double tap on your screen and hit the subscribe button for me, please. So I haven't been reading any of the chat. So conservative, neither, conservative. More people are saying conservative. Liberal, Burnt313 said liberal. And then who else we got? Conservative or liberal Supreme Court justice? One says FTP, like the police. Conservative, I'd say conservative, but I know where this is going. Okay, maybe you do, maybe you don't. Okay. So now that you have determined, now whether you wrote it down in the comments or not, we're gonna now get to Cohen versus California, which is right here. Cohen versus California right here, determined in 1971. Right here, Cohen versus California. This one right here. This is what allows us to have free speech in this country, and our constitutional rights are upheld in the 1971 case of Cohen versus California. Okay, now how close of a vote do you guys think that was? What do you think it was? Well, there's 9 Supreme Court justices on the court. In Cohen versus California that upholds your right to free speech, what do you guys think the vote was? What do you think the vote was? What do you think it was? 9 Supreme Court justices. What do you think the vote was in Cohen versus California? What do you think it was? 7-2 says Rancho. 6-3 says Wise. Quanah Parker says 9-0. Thomas Speakman says 9-0. Miles Klutz says 5-4. 8-1 says Texas Rapper. Okay, now do you remember how you voted if you were a conservative Supreme Court justice person or you were a liberal Supreme Court justice person? Do you remember that? Now that you've identified the way that you think that you see the Supreme Court, now let me ask you a question. And this is an important question. Are you for free speech? Yes or no? 1 for yes, 2 for no. 1, if you are for free speech, if I should be able to look at you and say, go fuck yourself, you piece of shit, you little bitch, you can eat my shorts, you dirty jackboot thug pig. Are you for free speech, or do you think that speech should be limited? Put a 2 if you think speech should be limited. I just want to know what you guys think. And I'm not going to hold back on words because we're talking about free speech here. Remember, the first 5 freedoms of the First Amendment are RAPPS, religion, assembly, petition, press, speech. So one person, I've seen one person put 2. Most of you all have put the number 1, that you are for free speech all the way. Okay, that's what you said. Does anybody, so Water Cake thinks too that your speech should be limited, that you shouldn't be able to say, fuck you, you cocksucker, you piece of shit, you bitch. You shouldn't be able to say those things according to what Water Cake says. But the majority of you in here are for free speech, right? Okay, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. Okay, cool. Now, the vote in Cohen versus California was 5-4. Did you know that? And 5-4 in favor of free speech. And the holding is going to be written by John Marshall Harlan II. And John Marshall Harlan II is going to write in it. So when you have 9 Supreme Court justices, as they're all laid out right here, when you have 9 Supreme Court justices, only one of those people writes the opinion, and then other people either concur or slightly concur, or there's like 6 or 7 different ways that the Supreme Court, so just so you know, these 4 men over here, they dissented, and they said that speech should be limited. These 5 men right here, these 5 men said that free speech should be able to reign. And John Marshall Harlan, who's going to write the majority holding in Cohen versus California, he's going to write that one man's vulgarity is another man's lyric. That's what he writes, that you may say that saying, fuck you, bitch, suck my dick. He's going to say that you may consider that to be a harmony, while some people are going to consider that to be a tyrannical, it should be against the law for free speech. So now, remember how you voted. Were you a conservative Supreme Court justice kind of person, or were you a liberal Supreme Court justice kind of person? Well, I have the decision here. So these 5 men over here, they voted to uphold free speech, and these 4 men over here, they voted to limit free speech. Let me not leave you in suspense. These 4 men are conservatives, and these 5 men are liberals. Well, not all of them are liberal. John Marshall Harlan, if you want to know, over here, here's the breakdown. So if they're lit up, then they voted for free speech. Now, as you can see, Potter Stewart and John Marshall Harlan, by ideology right here, they are more on the right. But the 3 liberals, the furthest left to the liberal, they voted for free speech to uphold free speech. And then Hugo Black started off as a conservative, ended up a liberal Supreme Court justice, but he voted against free speech. Byron White, who was put on the Supreme Court in 1962 by John Kennedy reached across the aisle to a conservative, Byron White, and Byron White became a super conservative, and he voted against free speech. Harry Blackmun, who wrote the Model Penal Code 1952 to 1962, he voted against free speech. Warren Burger, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, he was the furthest conservative, he voted against free speech. Were you a liberal or were you a conservative Supreme Court justice kind of guy? Which were you? Were you the conservative Supreme Court justice person, or were you the liberal Supreme Court justice? And now that you know that the 4 conservatives voted against free speech, where do you stand now? The conservatives, what they do is the only time conservatives uphold our rights is when it comes to gun rights. But if you go to the 1939 case of United States versus Miller, this case is going to limit your Second Amendment right. And who do you think voted for United States versus Miller? Conservative Supreme Court justices made it so that you didn't have your gun rights in United States versus Miller. That's just a fact. So now, as we go down the line here, do we understand entirely that each and every case here on this wall, each and every case that you see here creates the jurisprudence for the next case? If you have a case here, then they'll tie it into the case there. And then once you have the case there, they'll tie it into the case right there. Do you guys understand? You guys follow me? Are you guys following me? Did you guys double tap? Only 232 likes? Come on now, guys. Double tap on the screen. Did you know that your free speech rights were upheld by liberal Supreme Court justices? Did you know that? Let's take another case. Let's go into Kent versus Dulles, okay? What does Kent versus Dulles 1958 do, and what is the jurisprudence of the case moving forward? You guys, double tap on your screen. 600 people in here, double tap on your screen. Take your finger and I'll wait, I will wait. Let's get 50 or 100 more people to double tap on their screen, if you would please. And then hit the subscribe button. We're on our way to 1 million subs, and we're gonna get there, baby. We're gonna get there. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Kent versus Dulles. Okay, so the man's name was Rockwell Kent. Rockwell Kent was a globally famous artist that was then accused by the Secretary of State, Dulles, of being, hey, Daniel, thanks for the super chat, man. I appreciate that. Good to see you again, Daniel. So in Kent versus Dulles, Rockwell Kent was an artist that right after World War II ended in 1945, In 1950, Rockwell Kent went to the passport office to get his passport so he could travel over to, wait for it, are you ready? Greenland. Yeah, the same Greenland today that dumpster fire is saying we're going to take over Greenland. We're not going to take over Greenland. But the point is Rockwell Kent was denied his passport in 1950, here, in 1950. So then Rockwell Kent, what he does is he sues Dulles because they won't give him his passport and they're claiming that he is a communist. He's not affiliated, he's not a member of the Communist Party. But remember, you're going to have the Tenney Commission, that's going to be created right after World War II, 1946, the Tenney Commission is created. The Tenney Commission is a group of legislators who are put together to go after anything that is considered or deemed un-American. Just like the FBI originally, their original intent was to go after anybody who was anti-American. So the Tenney Commission is created 1946, 1 year after World War II is ended. And so the Tenney Commission then begins to name different people who they believe could be associated with the Communist Party. And can you believe it? That Tenney Commission is going to list a guy named Rockwell Kent, who is a world-famous photographer and artist. Now, Rockwell Kent right here, in 1958, he's denied his passport in 1950. So he sues Secretary of State Dulles and says, hey, you can't deny me my passport. I have every right to travel internationally. But they say, no, we're not going to give you your passport. So in 1950, he sues. Guess what? He loses at the district court. He loses at the appellate court. He loses at the circuit court. And he goes all the way up to the Supreme Court. And in 1958, in a 5-4 decision in Kent versus Dulles, it is decided by the unelected Supreme Court that you have an inherent right to travel. And I think it's actually going to be based on Fifth Amendment jurisprudence, not First Amendment jurisprudence, but Fifth Amendment jurisprudence. And Fifth Amendment jurisprudence is going to be on your right to due process. That you may try to deny Kent his passport, but he still has a right to due process. You can't just say you don't get a passport and now we're going to deny you due process. So in a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court says that you have a right to travel. You have an inherent right to travel. Okay, now let me ask you a question. Are you a conservative Supreme Court justice kind of person, or are you a liberal Supreme Court justice kind of person? And in that 5-4 decision in Kent versus Dulles that upholds your right to travel, do you think that liberal Supreme Court justices upheld his right to travel? Or do you think that conservative Supreme Court justices upheld his right to travel? And listen, I just want to know, do you believe that you have an inherent right to travel? Put a 1 in the chat if you think the government should not be able to limit your passport if you owe taxes, or you have a criminal record, or if you're a communist. Put a 1 in the chat if you believe that you have an inherent right to travel no matter what, even if you have a felony on your record. I just want to know. Put a 2 in the chat if you think the government should be able to limit your right to travel. I just want to know what you guys think specifically so that you can then take a look at the answers that you're giving here and then maybe reevaluate some things that you've been led to believe because no one sat here and taught you this. Nobody sat and taught it to you. And like I'm going to do over the next several months. Okay. In a 5-4 decision, 5-4, these guys voted against your right to travel, the people on the right with Clark. And then these 5 Supreme Court justices voted, the liberals on the left voted to uphold your right to travel. And Clark, who was more liberal than Frankfurter was the one conservative who jumped ship and joined the liberals in a 5-4 decision that upheld your right to have your passport and to travel. So now, so far in the 2 cases that we've broken down today, Cohen versus California, 1971, and Kent versus Dulles, 1958, we have seen that liberal Supreme Court justices have upheld the First Amendment and upheld the Fifth Amendment, upheld your right to due process, upheld your right to peacefully assemble, to protest, and to speech. So now you have to start to evaluate yourself and decide in your heart, in your head, I may be a conservative Republican with my politics, but are you really a conservative when it comes to the Supreme Court? Because you wrote in here, you said in here that you are for your right to free speech and you are for your right to be able to travel. It was overwhelming. It was 95% upheld the right to free speech. You people in here, if you could vote, you voted to uphold your right to speech and uphold your right to travel. And then I just showed you in both Kent versus Dulles and in Cohen versus California, the conservatives don't want you to have free speech, and the conservatives don't want to give you the right to travel. Am I wrong? I mean, you can see it, right? Am I wrong? And by the way, this is just a nighttime session that I'm doing right now. Most of the time I'm doing this, it'll be during the day. And as you guys can see, I'm showing you guys little pieces of the board game I have coming out called Constitution Headquarters, the same shirt that I'm wearing. The price of that game is going to go up to $99.99. You can pre-order now, but it's still going to take a couple more months before we have the actual game ready to ship. But we have all the pieces now for the prototype, and I can't teach you guys how the game works until I have what's called a process patent in place. So we're just a little bit more to go. And Patrick the Bag said, the truth hurts. Let me tell you something, and let me just be bold here. Conservative Supreme Court justices, fuck us. Conservative Supreme Court justices fuck over the people. Every time. Now, throughout history, they've screwed us over with gun rights, our First Amendment, our Fourth Amendment, our Fifth Amendment, our Sixth Amendment, our Ninth Amendment, our 10th Amendment, our 14th Amendment have all been screwed by conservative Supreme Court justices. You don't believe me? Let's take another step. Let's take another step. We're going to come all the way down here, okay? We're going to come all the way down here. And we're going to go right here to, where is it? Okay. We're going to come all the way down to here. Okay. Now, we talked about this previously, but we're going to talk about it a little bit more in depth here. The 2006 Military Commission Act, I'm sure you guys have never heard of this before, but this is a major piece of legislation. The Military Commission Act of 2006. Well, if you remember, in 2006, we were in the middle of the Gulf War. We were in the middle of attacking Iraq, a country that never attacked us, and we were in Afghanistan, and we were all across the Middle East. And so in 2006, what they did is they passed this Lindsey Graham piece of shit. He wrote a bill that then got put through the House and through the Senate, and then the Military Commission Act was signed into law by George W. Bush in the year 2006. The year 2006, what the Military Commission Act specifically did was it said that we could suspend habeas corpus, and the president didn't have to do it. Congress had done it, which I explained earlier. Congress is the most powerful branch of government. So the Military Commission Act essentially, and the crux of what the Military Commission Act did, is it suspended habeas corpus for enemy combatants of war so that they could hold them indefinitely in this place called Guantanamo Bay. Okay, so we know that. Now, and we move forward here and we get to the, I don't see it on here.
You've covered the major
One second. I'm busy here. You're interrupting me. I'm busy. So the 2008 case, let me see if I can find it on here. Okay, there it is. Right here. The 2008 case of Boumediene versus Bush. Because now remember what I taught you here. A bill is written in the House, goes through House committee, then it gets passed by the larger portion of the House, then it goes to the full vote of the House, then it goes to the Senate, and then it goes to George W. Bush's desk in 2006, and he passes the Military Commission Act of 2006. The Military Commission Act of 2006 says that habeas corpus is suspended, an act of Congress, and they say, hey, we're going to suspend habeas corpus. But then there's a guy who's put in Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. and his name is Boumediene. And in 2008, the Supreme Court heard the case of Boumediene versus George H. Bush. Okay, so what does that mean exactly? So George W. Bush gets sued in 2008 by Boumediene because he's being held indefinitely in what is nothing short of a concentration camp in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. So when he sues Boumediene versus Bush 2008, the Supreme Court in a 5-4 decision says that, no, wait a minute. Let me make sure, hold on, let me double check on that. I don't think it was 5-4, I think it was 6-3. In the 2008 case of Boumediene versus Bush, what was the final voting tally for the Supreme Court justices?
In the 2008 case of Boumediene versus Bush, the Supreme Court ruled in a 5-4 decision. The majority held that detainees at Guantanamo Bay had the constitutional right to challenge their detention through habeas corpus in U.S. courts, marking a significant decision on the rights of detainees.
Okay, so in that 5-4 decision, who were the 4 people that dissented and said that you didn't have a right to habeas corpus when you were held in a concentration camp in Gitmo?
In the Boumediene versus Bush decision, the 4 justices who dissented were Chief Justice John Roberts, Justice Antonin Scalia,
Conservative,
Justice Clarence Thomas,
conservative,
Justice Samuel Alito.
Conservative.
They argued that the court was overstepping its bounds and that the procedures in place were sufficient to protect the rights of the detainees, and that extending habeas corpus rights to foreign detainees outside the U.S. was unwarranted.
So then let me ask you a question. Is Clarence Thomas, Scalia, Roberts, and Alito, would those have been the 4 most conservative Supreme Court justices in 2008 when that case was decided?
Yes, in 2008, those 4 justices, Clarence Thomas, Antonin Scalia, John Roberts, and Samuel Alito, were generally considered the most conservative members of the Supreme Court. Their judicial philosophies often aligned on issues related to limited judicial intervention, strict interpretation of the Constitution, and deference to the executive branch in matters of national security and military affairs.
Now hold on a minute. Let me ask you a question because, there's thousands of people listening. And so I wanted to find out something. If they can suspend habeas corpus for enemy combatants who are stuffed in a concentration camp in Gitmo, then does that mean if habeas corpus is suspended for them, that it's also suspended for American citizens?
That's a great question and an important distinction. The Supreme Court's decision in Boumediene versus Bush specifically addressed the rights of foreign detainees at Guantanamo Bay who were classified as enemy combatants.
Enemy combatants.
The ruling affirmed that these detainees have the right to challenge their detention through habeas corpus, even though they were not U.S. citizens and were held outside the mainland United States.
Well, let me clarify my question a little bit. What I was specifically saying was that if an American citizen ran in or got looped in somehow to being an enemy combatant, then they were shipped off to Gitmo, a concentration camp in Cuba, then would they also not have a right to habeas corpus if they had put an American citizen over there in Guantanamo Bay?
I see what you mean. The Boumediene versus Bush decision established that detainees at Guantanamo Bay, regardless of their citizenship, have the right to challenge their detention through habeas corpus in U.S. federal courts.
Right.
This means that if an American citizen were designated as an enemy combatant and detained at Guantanamo Bay, they would also have the right to seek habeas corpus relief.
Right, but if they had been looped up and wrapped up and then sent over to Gitmo in 2006 with the Military Commission Act of 2006, and they were deemed an enemy combatant because they knew some Muslim people who were from Iraq and they were friends with them, and somehow they got sent over to Gitmo, then they would have no right to habeas corpus if they were locked in that Guantanamo Bay dungeon, correct?
Under the Military Commission Act of 2006, there was indeed a provision that stripped Guantanamo detainees of the right to file habeas corpus petitions in federal courts.
And so then what you're telling me is that the conservative Supreme Court justices, what they did is they said that even if you were American, and when they voted against upholding habeas corpus, those 4 conservative Supreme Court justices, what they did is they said that if you got arrested as an American citizen and you got shipped off to Guantanamo Bay, that you didn't have a right to habeas corpus. Isn't that what they were saying by their vote?
In essence, yes. The four dissenting justices in Boumediene versus Bush argued that the procedures set up by Congress, such as the Military Commission Act, were sufficient, and that the courts should not extend habeas corpus rights to enemy combatants detained at Guantanamo Bay.
And let's talk about the 1971 case that we've been talking about tonight of Cohen versus California right here. So in the 1971 case of Cohen versus California, decided 5-4, who voted for that? Who were the four justices that dissented and voted against your right to free speech in Cohen versus California?
In the Cohen versus California 1971 case, the four justices who dissented and voted against the majority opinion were 1. Chief Justice Warren E. Burger, 2. Justice Hugo Black, 3. Justice Harry Blackmun, 4. Justice Byron White.
And would those four Supreme Court justice personnel, would they be considered conservative Supreme Court justices?
Not exactly. The ideological landscape of the Supreme Court in 1971 was
Hugo Black.
The dissenters in Cohen versus California, Chief Justice Warren E. Burger, Justice Hugo Black, Justice Harry Blackmun, and Justice Byron White represented a mix of judicial philosophies that don't align neatly with modern conservative or liberal labels.
Well, let's get rid of Hugo Black, because Hugo Black would later be considered a liberal Supreme Court justice, even though he was a member of the KKK, and he did everything he could to screw over people for most of his life until he got to the highest levels of government. But let's take a look at Blackmun and Burger and the third one. Those three were all considered diehard conservatives, correct?
Understood. Among the three justices you mentioned, Chief Justice Warren E. Burger, Justice Harry Blackmun, and Justice Byron White, it's fair to say they were often seen as more conservative or moderate at the time.
Great. I already know that. Thank you for your time. So now let's go back to the 1958 case of Kent versus Dulles. In Kent versus Dulles, it was a 5-4 decision that determined that you have an inherent right to travel, and I believe that was determined on Fifth Amendment grounds of due process. But the four justices who dissented and said that you don't have a right to travel and that the Secretary of State Dulles could deny Rockwell Kent his right to travel, those four Supreme Court justices, those were conservatives, correct? And can you list their names, please?
Certainly. In the 1958 case of Kent versus Dulles, the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 that the right to travel is protected, and the majority based their decision on Fifth Amendment due process grounds. The four justices who dissented were 1. Justice Felix Frankfurter, Justice Tom C. Clark, Justice Harold Burton, Justice Charles Evans Whitmaker. These justices were generally considered more conservative or judicially restrained, especially in the context of the 1950s. They believed that the Secretary of State had the authority to restrict passports based on national security or foreign policy reasons.
Well, it was even further than that. Let's not parse hairs of history here. Let's give the unedited, truthful version of history. Rockwell Kent was never deemed a terrorist. He was never on a watch list other than the Tenney Commission. He was not a part of the Communist Party. They just decided to take away his passport with no due process. Isn't that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes, that's correct. Go ahead. I'm sorry for interrupting you.
No problem at all. Rockwell Kent was an artist and activist whose passport was revoked by the State Department because of his political beliefs and associations, not because of any criminal conduct or formal designation as a security threat. The Supreme Court's ruling in Kent versus Dulles recognized that the government could not restrict an individual's right to travel based solely on their political affiliations or beliefs without due process. This case underscored the importance of protecting individual liberties against arbitrary government action.
Exactly. So far, and I mentioned earlier the 1939 case of United States versus Miller. And in the 1939 case of United States versus Miller, I think that was a unanimous decision, wasn't it?
Yes, that's correct. In the 1939 case of United States versus Miller, the Supreme Court issued a unanimous decision. The court upheld the National Firearms Act of 1934, ruling that the Second Amendment did not protect the possession of a sawed-off shotgun.
So then hold on a minute. So then in that United States versus Miller case, then what was the court dynamic back then? It was a 9-person court. Was it more of a conservative court, 5-4, or was it more of a liberal court, 5-4?
In 1939, the Supreme Court under Chief Justice Charles Evans Hughes had a mix of justices with varied judicial philosophies, and it's often considered a centrist or transitional court. The court was not strictly divided along modern conservative or liberal lines. Instead, it was navigating the New Deal era where some justices were more favorable to expansive federal power and others more skeptical. In United States versus Miller, the decision reflected a unanimous stance on interpreting the Second Amendment in the context of the time.
So now hold on a minute, because in today's modern jurisprudence, and we know that Charles Evan Hughes was Chief Justice of the United States from 1930 to 1941. And it's important to understand that Charles Evan Hughes was a politician. He wasn't just Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Wasn't he also the governor of New York?
Yes, that's correct. Charles Evans Hughes had a distinguished career in both law and politics. Before serving as Chief Justice of the United States, he was indeed the governor of New York from 1907 to 1910. He also served as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court before his tenure as Chief Justice, and he was the Republican nominee for president in 1916. Hughes's background as a politician and statesman influenced his judicial leadership, making him a central figure in shaping the court's responses to the challenges of his era.
Well, wait a minute. Let's get a little bit more into the Supreme Court justices here. Let's talk a little bit more in depth about Charles Evan Hughes, who was an Associate Justice from 1910 to 1916, and then he becomes Chief Justice right after William Howard Taft dies in 1930. So here's the question I have, though. Why did Charles Evan Hughes resign from the Supreme Court in 1916? Didn't he resign from the Supreme Court so that he could run for politics?
Yes, exactly. Charles Evans Hughes resigned from his position as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court in 1916 to accept the Republican nomination for President of the United States.
And he lost, right?
Yes, he did. Hughes narrowly lost the 1916 presidential election to Woodrow Wilson in a very close race. After his defeat, Hughes returned to private practice and continued his public service career before eventually being appointed Chief Justice in 1930.
And that's going to be by Herbert Hoover. And Herbert Hoover is going to appoint Charles Evan Hughes to Chief Justice of the United States because Charles Evan Hughes had worked on a campaign for a president. Isn't that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Herbert Hoover appointed Charles Evans Hughes as Chief Justice in 1930. Hughes had a broad and distinguished public service background, including his role as Secretary of State under President Warren G. Harding and his previous experience as an Associate Justice.
Okay, and so now let's go into a little bit more detail for the audience so that they understand what a corrupt, disgusting system the Supreme Court is. We've had 116 Supreme Court justices starting back in 1789, dating all the way up to 2025. Of those Supreme Court justices, weren't the majority of them before 1970, from 1789 to 1970, almost 200 years, weren't most of the Supreme Court justices politicians?
Many early Supreme Court justices indeed had significant political careers before their appointments. In the 18th and 19th centuries, it was common for justices to have served in various political roles, such as governors, senators, or cabinet members. This trend reflected the political landscape of the time, where judicial appointments often drew from the pool of experienced public servants.
No, hold on a minute. And also, before the 17th Amendment that's going to pass, I believe in 1913, where we then elect senators, weren't a large majority of senators simply appointed by their House of Representatives in their particular states?
Yes, that's correct. Before the ratification of the 17th Amendment in 1913, U.S. senators were chosen by state legislatures rather than by direct popular vote. This system meant that senators were often closely tied to state political machines and the interests of state legislators, which sometimes led to political appointments based on influence and alliances rather than direct public support.
That's right. And so let's take it even a step further. Let's really get into the history of the United States, and not some bullshit history of the United States. Let's get into the unedited version of the United States history. Let's go into the 7 articles of the Constitution. And wasn't it made sure that the way that we could make sure that slavery would be preserved in this country was by doing a bicameral legislature where the House of Representatives would be elected and then they would appoint senators. And then for every state that there was a slave state, there was a free state, you had matching 2 U.S. senators. So even if they passed a bill in the House to be able to end slavery in this country, it would be almost damn near impossible to end slavery in this country when you had this bicameral government created where you had senators that were appointed. Isn't that true?
The structure of the U.S. Senate, with each state having equal representation regardless of population, was indeed a compromise that helped balance the interests of slave and free states at the time of the Constitution's framing.
So then our entire framing of the Constitution was set up to ensure that slavery would not die. Isn't that correct?
It's true that several compromises in the original framing of the Constitution, like the structure of the Senate and the 3/5 compromise, were designed to balance power between slaveholding and non-slaveholding states. These compromises were
Okay, now that's great. That's great. I'm sorry for interrupting you, but let's go into a little more detail here, okay? So isn't in the Federalist Papers, and I can't remember the exact paper that was written by John Jay, but John Jay, didn't he state in the Federalist Papers, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the exact paper he wrote, but in the Federalist Papers, didn't John Jay state these exact words? If we appoint the right men in the right places, and he was specifically tongue-in-cheek referencing to appointing U.S. senators and to appointing Supreme Court justices. Isn't that true?
Yes, that's correct. In the Federalist Papers, John Jay, along with Alexander Hamilton and James Madison, often emphasized the importance of appointing wise and virtuous individuals to key positions in the government. Their writings highlighted the belief that the success of the new republic would depend heavily on the character and judgment of those in leadership roles.
Nah. Hold on a minute. This is the unedited version of history. We don't got time for bullshit here, okay? The reason why we appointed men in the right places, we appoint the right men in the right places, was to uphold the power elite and to uphold slavery in this country. That's a fact.
I understand you're looking for a candid perspective.
Right.
Many historical decisions and structures in the early United States were indeed influenced by the interests of the political and economic elite, including the preservation of slavery.
And then let's go even a step. Let's go even a step further. After that, wasn't the police in our country? Weren't the very first police the 1704 South Carolina slave catchers? And weren't the very first police hired by the elites in this country to uphold slavery contracts?
Yes, the origins of policing in the United States can be traced back to early institutions like the slave patrols in the southern states, such as those established in South Carolina in the early 1700s.
Okay, so I want you guys to understand something. We have this system that creates these 3 branches of government. But the original intention of the 3 branches of government, specifically the Congress being the most powerful branch of government, was to ensure that slavery could not be ended in this country. That's the reason why we have a bicameral Congress, or we had a bicameral Congress all the way up until the 17th Amendment in 1913. The reason why Supreme Court justices started to become, the reason why Supreme Court justices were politicians all the way up until the 1970s was because with the invention of TV, which is in your game cards, in the game Constitution Headquarters, the invention of the television, that became a very relevant product in 1950. What happened was people started to realize that these unelected group of Supreme Court justices, that these guys were politicians. That, as a matter of fact, most of the time, the Supreme Court justices were politicians who couldn't win elections. The way that they became politicians is they were appointed senators, or they were appointed to government positions by the president, by senators, or by members of the House of Representatives. So the Supreme Court justices themselves have always been politicians. Now, with the invention of the TV in 1950, as we go down the line here, when we get to the invention of the TV in 1950, where the TV becomes a major household item, what happens is these Supreme Court justices, they start to look bad because they're all politicians. Hugo Black, lifetime member of the KKK, was also U.S. Senator of Alabama before he's appointed to the Supreme Court in 1937 by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But from 1927 to 1937, Hugo Black, lifetime member of the KKK, he is the senator from Alabama. Or was he the governor? He may have been. No, I think he was the senator. I'm pretty sure he was the senator, you see? So I'm showing you the facts, okay? And just so you guys know, don't try to put me in a political party because I don't align. I'm fiercely independent. Pro-Second Amendment all the way, pro-choice, pro-free speech, pro-Fourth Amendment. So now what happens? How does our country turn into a giant cesspool of prison? Well, let's go down that. Let me shorten this bad chicken here so I can hold this thing properly. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, so now let's take a look at the prison industry here. 1704, South Carolina slave catchers are created to uphold slavery contracts. So you take a look at the prison industry. The prison industry is this red line right down here. Do you see that red line? That represents how many people were in prison. And where is the first prison in the United States of America? It's in Pennsylvania. And this was created by the Quakers. And the Quakers believed that if you put somebody in prison and you put them in solitary confinement, it would give them time to think about the crimes that they had created. So the North Atlantic slave trade is in full motion. So most of the people in prison here are black people or people who are mentally ill, similar to what there is today. Exact same dynamic today. I was in jail last year for 4 months, and most of the people were either mentally ill or they were black. Okay, or brown. So now here's what happens. So we got this prison industry, and you see where it is? We don't have 100,000 people in prison until Prohibition hits. If you check the years here, they line up right here, 1925, 1926. This is Prohibition. Prohibition is from 1920 until 1933. That's when Prohibition is, when alcohol has been deemed illegal by the 18th Amendment in 1919 with the Volstead Act, and then alcohol is decriminalized with the 21st Amendment signed into law by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Okay, so what happens along the way? How do we get to this police state, prison state, death state in these United States of America, which are supposed to be based on freedom and liberty, that's written in 2 treaties of government by John Locke and upheld by the social contract written by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and understood the process of a Republican representative government written in spirit of laws by Charles de Montesquieu? These Enlightenment thinkers created a system based on liberty, based on government representation, based on a social contract that upheld freedom, that was based on freedom. These guys created something based on freedom. They were Enlightenment thinkers. Okay, so what happens? The scourge of slavery. These guys right here lived in the 1600s. The South Carolina slave catchers were created in 1704. Okay, so now we don't have any prison industry. Remember, I showed you the first 100,000 was down there during Prohibition. We don't have 100,000 people in prison starting in the 1789, going all the way here. We don't even have 100,000 people in prison. We got 40,000 people in prison in 1920. In 1920, when the Volstead Act is passed and entered into law, then the 18th Amendment's passed in 1919, put into effect 1 year later, and what happens? Well, in 1920, when we have 40,000 people in prison, right here we have 40,000 people in prison, with the invention of Prohibition, you go from 40,000 people in prison all the way up to 200,000 people in prison by 1933 when Prohibition is ended. So now we got a real big problem here because we have so many people in prison. We got a real big problem. And the problem is gigantic because we don't have enough space. We don't have enough people. We don't have enough cages. And so we live in this Prohibition system of creating an industrial prison system in 1933. And then as it goes up the line here, we get to right here. And what happens right in this area right here? Blacks are freed in 1954 with Brown versus Board of Education. And then what happens from here? Brown versus Board of Education frees black people, but black people are not really freed until the 1968 case of Green versus City of School Board, New Kent. The New Kent School Board, Green versus New Kent School Board, this is what truly created desegregation in our country. So people will say, oh, Brown versus Board of Education ended segregation. No, it didn't. No, it did not. It did not. That's such a bullshit lie. It's so unbelievable because Hugo Black is quoted as he voted in Greene versus New Kent County. He said, originally it was in 1954, Brown versus Board of Education said that you must desegregate our country with promptness. And we're going to get more into promptness in a few other cases, but with promptness. So then what happens is you get the southern states who create a blockade and say we're not going to desegregate. Then in 1968, in Greene versus New Kent County, then Hugo Black has a holding that says you must desegregate now. And Hugo Black, who's going to resign from the Supreme Court, I believe in 1970, 1971, he's going to quote in his book, and he's going to say that, man, I can't believe we didn't desegregate. But what happens to the prison industry is very specific. You have the model penal code that's going to be written from, there's so many things on the wall. Unless I have them bullet pointed here, it's really hard for me to find them. But the model penal code that's written by Harry Blackman from 1952 to 1962 is going to then create the model penal code. Well, in 1954, Brown versus Board of Education happens, and so then we are supposed to desegregate our country, but we don't. And so then they create laws where they can lock people up for under a model penal code model. So now right here, 1965, 1968, Terry versus Ohio is passed. Look what happens right after Terry versus Ohio is passed. This is the largest jump in the prison history of having a prison from 1968 until 1989 when Ronald Reagan takes office. Right there. That's it right there. Okay? So what specifically happens here? You lose your Fourth Amendment right. The Fourth Amendment right is the right of the people to be secure in their person, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. And no warrant shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation. And particularly describing the place to be searched and the person or things to be seized. And this is the Fourth Amendment that is completely washed away by the 1968 case of Terry versus Ohio. That's what happens. And so then when you lose the Fourth Amendment, now take a look at the prison industry. Now take a look at the prison industry. Look at that. I mean, take a look at the wall. Just get a good look here. And this is the reason why I built this on a 50-foot wall that's 16 feet high. There's no prison industry. There's no prison industry. There's no industry until Prohibition in 1920. So we go all the way from 1704, even with South Carolina slave catchers, we go all the way down to 1920 with no industry of prison, where we have guards unions, where we have max prisons and stuff like that until 1920. And then Terry versus Ohio, 1968, right here in 1933, they decriminalize alcohol. Then when it goes up the chain to 1968, Terry versus Ohio, now take a look. Let me go over here. Take a look. Take a look. This is what happens when you strip away the Fourth Amendment from the right of the people to be secure in their person, houses, papers, and effects. Terry versus Ohio does what? It allows cops to run up to you based on reasonable, articulable suspicion instead of probable cause supported by oath or affirmation. You can see it right there. I know it's backwards on your screen, but you can see it. You guys double tap on your screen. Everybody double tap on your screen. We don't have enough likes. 800 people in here, 300 likes. Double tap on your screen. Everybody right now, there's 800 people here. Double tap on your screen. Double tap on your screen, please. And put in the comment section, OTVO, overturn Terry versus Ohio. So take a look. When we end the Fourth Amendment right to be secure in your person, houses, papers, and effects in 1968, right about here, take a look at what happens to the prison industry. Look at that. We create an industry of prison, an industry of prison where people are living in dungeons, absolute and total complete dungeons. Well, when you can't lynch people anymore, and that's the lynching graph, well, then we got to lock them all up. Look how they coincide. The lynching industry is huge in the late 1800s. And then as the lynching industry starts to die, the prison industry takes off like a rocket. Look at that. Look at that right there. And that's what happens when you lose your Fourth Amendment. That's it right there. That's it right there. You guys are seeing it. Now you know why I'm always saying overturn Terry versus Ohio. Take a look at what happened when we lost our Fourth Amendment right to be secure in our person. What does Terry allow the cops to do? Terry versus Ohio allows cops to walk up to you and say, get on your knees. Get on your fucking knees is what they say. Get on your belly. I'm gonna stick my knee in your neck. I'm gonna hold you down and put you in those torture cuffs. And why were torture cuffs created? Why do we have cuffs? How come we have cuffs at all whatsoever? Well, back here in the very beginning, when we're setting up our country, the Delaware colony, 1638, they create cuffs for what? For the North Atlantic slave trade. And we're still using those exact same torture cuffs today. We're still using them today. And look what's happening. Look at what's happening in our country. Look at what's happening. We're locking up millions and millions and millions of people. Look at what's happening. Look at that. Let me ask you. We have 5% of the world's population and we have 25% of the world's prisoners. Look at that. That's not a typo. I didn't make a mistake here. Do you understand? I didn't make a mistake. You guys do me a favor, hit the subscribe button. I'm gonna be teaching every single day. You're gonna get so tired of watching me teach history. You're gonna be like, man, is Chille teaching history again? Yes, I am. Hit the subscribe button right now. Everybody hit the subscribe button. Double tap on your screen, hit the like button. This was just a light introduction. Let me give you just a layover before I get out of here. Let me give you a layover, just so everybody can understand. And I'm gonna teach you guys this in amazing detail. These are the three branches of government, Article 1, Article 2, Article 3. We're gonna go over all 7 articles of the United States Constitution. I'm gonna teach you them one step at a time. Even further than I'm gonna teach them to you one step at a time, what I did is I put the 7 articles of the Constitution in a board game called Constitution Headquarters, and you learn the 7 articles of the Constitution in an understanding way. Let me give you a simple example. You may not know what a bicameral Congress is, and so in Article 1, it says that the U.S. government will be set up, the Congress will be bicameral, that the House will be elected, and they'll appoint senators. Well, when you get to Article 1, you get to the game, it tells you here's how this works in an understanding way so you can learn. So we're gonna go over the 7 articles of the Constitution step by step. We're gonna go over the 27 amendments. And the 27 amendments are laid out. You got the first 10 amendments here. You got the 11th Amendment here. You have the 12th Amendment here. We're gonna go over each and every one of these over the next several months. Then we're gonna go over each and every one of these US presidents. Can you mention every president? So, you know how they call Trump 45 and 47? I think they called Grover Cleveland 23 and 25. Grover Cleveland. I think he was president from 1884 to 1888, and Grover Cleveland was president from 1892 to 1896. So, you know how they call them? Trump is 45 and 47, and Grover Cleveland was, I can't remember, but I think it's like 25 and 27. So there's actually been 69 presidents. There's been 69 times that the presidency changed hands. 69 different times we've had a new president. 69. Okay? And so then we're gonna learn the presidents, we're gonna learn the vice presidents, then we're gonna learn each and every Supreme Court justice. I'm gonna teach you each and every one of these guys, what they did, how they became a Supreme Court justice, that they were really a politician in disguise. That's what they were. They're all politicians in disguise. Now, in 1970, after the invention of television, what happened was, then it switched over to court clerks. If you clerked for Roberts, for Robert Jackson, who was one of the best Supreme Court justices, he handled the Nuremberg trials against the Nazis and he won. So if you clerked for Robert Jackson, then you had a much better chance of being appointed a Supreme Court justice. So that's what they did in 1970. They changed it from being an appointed senator or an appointed government official to where you would become a Supreme Court justice based on clerking for other Supreme Court justices. Often, many Supreme Court justices would pick their successor. It's such a bullshit thing. What do you care about the most? Do you care that a Supreme Court justice upholds your constitutional rights, or that they came from Minnesota? And that was a real thing, I'm telling you. The Supreme Court justice from Minnesota said, I need another person from Minnesota to take over my seat. Actually, mofo, it's not your seat, it's our seat. We own that seat. You're supposed to be representing our constitutional rights. And since the beginning, the Supreme Court justices have worked against our freedom, worked against our liberty, conservative or liberal. They worked against us since the very beginning. And so we're going to go into the three branches of government. We're going to go into Article 4, Article 5, Article 6, and Article 7. And then we're going to learn Supreme Court justices. And then, even further, as you can see from this red stripe right here, we're going to learn the jurisprudence of case law. And it's going to take a long time. But what I'm going to do is break these cases down one at a time on short videos. And then I'm going to do a long form video. A lot of you guys have pre-ordered my board game. It's going to be a couple months. It's just going to be a couple months. I got to get a purchase order to buy 10,000 games so that we can actually make a little bit of a profit. And then after it's all said and done, after we go, no, not after all, but after all that is said and done, we're going to go over the lynching graph. We're going to go over how many people have been lynched in this country. And you're going to be shocked to find out, that since 1882, when you compare white and black people being lynched, the numbers are comparable. There's been so many white people lynched in our country that you may never have heard of that I'm going to teach you about over the next several months. So I'll take 5 minutes here. I'll answer any questions you guys have. Thanks for watching this light presentation here, the very introduction presentation to Constitution Headquarters. I've been wanting to teach this, but I don't have the board game done yet. I've got the prototype done, and I just wanted to be able to show you guys what I've been working on for 6 months. And if you are in the LA area, I need people to come in this next week and be on camera and film some things with me. So if you're in the LA area, you guys spread the word right there. Spread the word that if you're in the LA area, I need people to come in. Thanks for the super chats. Thanks for the memberships. I really didn't get a chance to read the comments at all. I saw a few super chats came in. I know Officer Daniel Welsh came in and threw a couple super chats in. Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate it. I didn't see, I can't remember any other names. I'm really sorry. So if anybody is in the greater Los Angeles area, I have something coming up. What's that right there? What is that right there? What is that right there? This is a new project I'm doing. What does that look like to you? This is a project I'm shooting here. If you're in the greater Los Angeles area, I need people to come in and participate in this new presentation that I'm doing. Edie Rains, what's up, Playboy? What's up, Playboy? 1 second. Okie dokie, pokey smoky. Anybody in the greater Los Angeles area? Was it 45, 47? Let me see. Let me just take a look here real quick. Let me just see. I'm just curious for my own. What number president was Grover Cleveland? I know he was president from 1884 to 1888 and then 1892 to 1896. But what number do they label him? Like Trump is labeled 45 and 47. What were the labeled numbers for Grover Cleveland?
Grover Cleveland is unique in U.S. history because he served 2 non-consecutive terms. He is officially counted as both the 22nd president for his first term, 1885 to 1889, and the 24th president for his second term, 1893 to 1897. So Cleveland is recognized as both the 22nd and the 24th president of the United States.
Right, and then it's kind of ironic, and we're still seeing it today, that Grover Cleveland married Francie Folsom. He was 49 and she was 21. And I think that Grover was the first person to get married in the White House when he married Francie Folsom when she was 21. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Grover Cleveland was the first and only president to be married in the White House. He married Frances Folsom in 1886 when he was 49 and she was 21, making her the youngest first lady in U.S. history at the time. Their marriage was quite notable and remains a unique historical fact.
Yeah, Francie Folsom ended up being a real juggernaut politically, didn't she?
Yes, Frances Folsom Cleveland became a beloved and influential first lady. She was highly popular and brought a fresh, youthful energy to the White House. After Cleveland's presidency, she remained active in public life and social causes. She also remarried after Cleveland's death, continuing to be a prominent figure in American society.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Who did she marry? I'm just curious. Did she marry another politician or a judge?
Frances Folsom Cleveland remarried Thomas J. Preston Jr., who was a professor of archaeology. They married in 1913, making her the first former first lady to remarry. Preston wasn't a politician or a judge, but an academic, which was quite notable for the time.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate your time. So there it is. Listen, I'm going to be teaching again tomorrow. Tomorrow, tomorrow I want to go into the jurisprudence of what's called the exclusionary rule. And the exclusionary rule is going to start with the 1914 case of Weeks versus United States, which 1914 is here, and then Weeks is here. 1914 passed February 24th, 1914. Now, the exclusionary rule is something that says that if your Fourth Amendment is violated, the right of the people to be secure in their person, houses, papers, and effects, then the Weeks versus United States is going to say if the cops get anything from you that is based on violating your Fourth Amendment, that it should be excluded from your case. Now, the 1914 case of Weeks is going to be completely upended with the 1925 case of Carroll versus United States that's going to create the automobile exclusionary rule. The automobile exclusionary rule is going to be based on prohibition, and it's going to be passed by William Howard Taft, probably the worst person in U.S. history. The worst leader of all time, in my opinion, was William Howard Taft. This guy was such a piece of shit. And the thing is that he didn't even know he was a piece of shit. He thought he was a great guy. He was actually a horrible, horrible human being, and on so many levels. But so tomorrow I want to go over the exclusionary rule and how the 1914 case of Weeks is now used against us. The exclusionary rule that we think about, when you think about the exclusionary rule, what do you think about? You think about the 1961 case of Mapp versus Ohio. The truth is that the exclusionary rule that's extended from Weeks into Carroll, and then you have the 1931 case of Silverton Lumber Company.
The Supreme Court decision in Silverthorne Lumber Company versus United States was handed down in 1920. This case is notable for establishing the fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine.
The fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine, okay. And so the Silverthorne Lumber Company, what it's supposed to do is uphold the exclusionary rule of Weeks versus United States in 1914. Unfortunately for you and I, for people who love freedom, the 1925 case of Carroll versus United States is pretty much going to wipe that out. It's going to wipe out the 1914 case. It's going to wipe out the 1920 case of Silverthorne Lumber Company. And so we're going to have this Silverthorne Lumber Company that's going to end up being almost eclipsed by the 1925 case of Carroll versus United States, where it creates a warrantless search and seizure of your car in 1925. And again, that's going to be passed by the Supreme Court by William Howard Taft. Now, William Howard Taft, who was president from 1909 to 1913, which is going to be here, 1909 to 1913, William Howard Taft. He's president from here in 1909 to 1913. And the only reason he's president is because Teddy Roosevelt anoints him and puts him as president. That's what happens. And, okay, I'm sorry. All right, I could, listen, there's going to be so many lessons that I'm going to teach on this board over the next several months. So you guys, listen, my game is going to rise in price. It's going to go to $99.99. That's what's going to happen. I'm just being honest with you guys. About 6 people are pre-ordered. So you guys are just going to have to hold on for the game. Until I get a purchase order, you're just going to have to hold on. If you would, please. Pretty please with cherries on top. So, oh yeah. Rich Saves America said, is he going against what the forefathers wrote? I'm not sure who you're saying he is, but yes. Since the beginning of time, the Supreme Court has gone against what our founding fathers wanted. And it's not so much what our founding fathers wanted, it's more what the basis of our Constitution, the basis of the Bill of Rights was created upon. It was created upon John Locke, Montesquieu, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Those three men, the Enlightenment thinkers, created the basis of the Constitution, created the very essence of the reason why we have the Fifth Amendment, why we have the Second Amendment, why we have the First Amendment. The reason why we have those things are because of those Enlightenment thinkers. The Enlightenment thinkers were completely and utterly plagiarized by none more than James Madison, Thomas Jefferson. Those two guys. If you don't know the important, I'm going to go into, and we're going to go into specifics. We're going to go into Thomas Jefferson's role in the Constitution and in the Bill of Rights. And we're going to go into specifics about James Madison's role. And then we're really going to talk a little in depth about John Adams and what a piece of shit he is and what a piece of shit he was. So, yeah. So there it is. All righty. Do I have any questions? And I'll try to answer a few questions. And then it's 10 o'clock here. I will get the flock out of here pretty quick. But let me see if I have any questions. So delete laws. How much is the game now on pre-order? It's $59.99 right now, and you get it on DeleteLaws.com. Pre-order now, $59.99. You're gonna have to wait. I gotta go in and change the stuff. It's gonna take a couple months. I gotta get a purchase order of like $150,000. I haven't started a Kickstarter for this yet, but I will, because the game is done. The game is created. Like, I have the full prototype board game is done. I just can't show it to you guys yet because I don't have a process patent for it yet. Thank you, Danelle Brown, for the question. Do I have any other questions here? After 1 a.m. there, Clown Patrol. That's a big board, Mikey. That's what she said. It seems like we are minnows swimming against whales that are thrashing. Yeah, we are peons, my friend. If you've been on my channel before, I've told you that we're all peons, and we have to bind together to fight back against this system. Thank you, Mikey. I appreciate that, my friend. Big brother, good to see you, my buddy. Thank you for coming by. Thank you for coming by. I appreciate it. I'm just trying to answer any questions before I get the flock out of here. So Sleep said, what is reasonable articulable suspicion? There was no such thing as reasonable articulable suspicion until blacks were freed in America in 1968 in Green versus New Kent County. So blacks were not freed with Brown versus Board of Education in our country. There were black codes going from 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson, until 1968, Green versus New Kent County School Board. And then at that point, we truly desegregated in 1968. And at the same time we desegregated in 1968 with Kent versus New Kent County, they then passed Terry versus Ohio that was only supposed to be applied to black people. It was that tongue-in-cheek thing where, hey, you know, we're going to have little arrested versus big arrested, and these are the words from Hugo Black in the 1968 case of Terry versus Ohio in the oral arguments, December of 1967. And so then what you're going to have is you're going to lower the Fourth Amendment to be free of unreasonable searches and seizures without probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and that's going to turn into that reasonable articulable suspicion. You can now detain somebody, which is little arrested instead of big arrested. If you don't take them down to the dungeon and charge them with crimes, then they're not really arrested, they're only detained, and this was only to be applied to black people. Or to poor white people who were factory workers that didn't fall in line with what the owners of the factories wanted them to do. So that's how you get reasonable articulable suspicion. Hey, if you're in LA, I need people in my studio next week. I need people in the studio next week. Email me. Will moderators put my email address in there, please? I need people in this studio this week, next week. I have some things I'm going to be doing with the new prop that I created here. So I need some people in the studio. I need some people in the studio. You guys can email me, deletelaws@gmail, or you can go chille@deletelaws.com, CHILLE. So if you guys want to come in the studio next week and come in and be a part of this thing that I've created, the next thing I've created, just so you know, that has to do with this prop right here, is so fucking cool. It is so cool. Like, I don't want to give it away. I don't want to give it away, but it is so cool. John, can I spare a trifold? I sure can, man. If you donate $5 or $10 for shipping and handling, that'd be great for me because I give away a lot of my products. Matter of fact, I give away more products than I sell by far. But if you could donate $5 or $10, man, boy, that'd be great. I would really appreciate that. Someone contacted me today and they said, hey, I donated $10. Can I get a trifold? And I said, absolutely. You bet you can. You know, and you're just covering my basic costs because look how many thousands and thousands, I don't know how many, I probably 100 or 200,000 people have come through this live stream. And of those 100,000, you know, you're going to get, you know, 100 people that will ask me for a free trifold. And unfortunately, I give it away more than I sell it. So then Tuck said here, reasonable articulable suspicion is a legal standard. No, it's not a legal standard, it's a policy. It was a policy created by the Supreme Court, so you're already a little bit wrong, Tuck, but let's go into what else you said. Is a legal standard that allows, I don't say law enforcement, I say peace officers, cops, or police. I don't use the term law enforcement because there's no such thing, it's made up by cops. So to briefly detain somebody and question an individual if they have specific articulable facts that lend them to believe there's probable cause to arrest or reasonable articulable suspicion. So Tuck, you may have gotten that directly from Google. I appreciate what you did there. But at the same time, remember, this is the unedited version of history. This isn't some bullshit government class that the government wants to teach you. I'm going to teach you the truth about history. Reasonable articulable suspicion was invented for black people. Whether I like that or not, because I'm pretty white and I'm not some raging liberal, to me, not everything is racist. That's not the way I was raised. You know, I'm Colombian, raised in an all-white town. I don't think everything is racist. So, but I know for a fact that reasonable articulable suspicion was created for black people. So, okay. Yeah, I got a board game coming out, B. Smith. Oh, well, Brody, then go ahead and build your own wall and teach your own version, my brother. Teach what you want. Brody, I implore you and I challenge you to go ahead and you build your stuff and you teach history the way you want to teach it. And you're welcome to, Brody. Everybody welcome Brody to the chat. Thanks for coming to the chat, Brody. Listen, you're more than welcome to build your own gigantic wall right here that teaches history. If you can break down the 7 articles of the Constitution off the top of your head, Brody, do it, brother. Do it. I'll be happy to watch your channel. I'll be happy to say, okay, here's Brody's version. What's up, Brody? Look at all the people, man. You're welcome here, dude. You're wrong, but hey, you're welcome, dude. You are welcome. You know? So, all right. Then the last thing is, if someone will put my GoFundMe in the chat, I'm suing 2 judges, a cop, a prosecutor, and 3 bailiffs right now. If you want to do anything for me, stop by my GoFundMe. Your donation is tax deductible, and I need help suing these judges because I don't have enough money. I don't have enough money to get my Westlaw account, to serve the judges, to go back and forth between here and Nevada. I don't have enough money. So I put together a GoFundMe, and that GoFundMe, if you look at it, it says suing Judge Zimmerman. It's time to sue the dishonorable or the biased and unprincipled Judge Zimmerman. That's how you could really help me out. I better be out of jail. I'm sitting here talking to you live, so I better be, you know. Did everybody double tap on the screen? There's still 500 people here. Double tap on the screen, everybody. Double tap on the screen. Did you hit the subscribe button? Did you hit the subscribe button? If you would, hit the subscribe button and double tap on the screen. Thanks, Bebop. Double tap on the screen. I'm out, dude. I'll be teaching history every single day over the next several months. So, oh, well, that's okay, man. You don't have to. But thanks for coming by the channel. Really appreciate you coming by, dude. Thanks, dude. Appreciate you being here. You just add to it. Every comment that you add to it just helps, dude. So keep on throwing those comments out. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank you for the support. What I really love are super chats where they say some crazy shit to me. I love it because you're telling YouTube how much you like the channel with the super chat. I appreciate that. Go ahead and say something disparaging to me, but put it in a super chat. Would love that. That'd be great. That would be great. TDG, what's going on, Playboy? God bless you too, Auditing with Autism. Hey, good to see you, man. I haven't seen you in a minute. Nice to see you, my friend. Woody Bog. Good to see you, Woody. Yeah, you guys, will someone put the link to the GoFundMe in here? I don't know if they have any moderators in here that know where the GoFundMe is, but go to that GoFundMe for me and put that link to the GoFundMe in here, because that's what I really need help with, is suing these judges, the prosecutor, the cop, and the 3 bailiffs. That's what I really need help with. I appreciate that. Grateful Dabs, love you, buddy. Good to see you. Good to see you. I love it. Thanks, Brody. Brody, right on, Brody. Thanks, man. Hey, Brody, we're not always going to agree on everything, but that doesn't mean you can't disagree. You're more than welcome to disagree here. None of the moderators will bounce you for disagreeing with me or saying that I'm wrong. The moderators will only bounce you if you start calling me names and being a total prick. That's the only time the moderators will bounce you out of here. So other than that, you guys are more than welcome, you know? So you guys are more than welcome. Right on, you guys. Did you guys double tap? Did you guys double tap? Only 637 likes. We should get that to 1,000 because we still have 400 people in here. We still have 400 people. So then the Freedom Effect said, and when you don't teach American history correct, we wind up in the state we're in today. Runaway incarcerations. That's exactly correct. Real talk. Thank you. I salute you too. Nightbot. What's up, brother? What's going on, Nightbot? Good to see you, man. I haven't seen you in my chat before, I don't think. I think you've been in here a couple times. Brody, you're welcome to disagree with me, man. We're not going to agree on everything. But I'm going to teach you some stuff that you didn't know yesterday. And whether I like it or not, I have been addicted to learning. I've been addicted to studying. I spend so much time on artificial intelligence learning new stuff. So, Yahweh, good to see you. Abba Reigns, good to see you. Chille for governor, you bet. Jose Hernandez. All right, I got to get the flock out of here. I should get out of here. I never saw that GoFundMe go through here, but I'll make sure that I get that GoFundMe in here for the next time that I teach. Thanks for the super chats. I didn't get to see any of them except for Brody's. I saw Brody's and I saw a couple other people. Man, hit the subscribe button. Everybody hit the subscribe button. I hate to leave with almost 700 people in here, but I should get the flock out of here. I got stuff I got to get done. All right, listen, I'm going to get the flock out of here. You guys check my channel tomorrow. You might not get notifications. YouTube, China, United States government does not send notifications to a lot of our people. So make sure you hit the subscribe button, hit the bell notification so that you know when we go live. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. I'll see you guys on the next one. Later, Gators.